And let me just say, make sure to have a box of Kleenex right next to you for this particular video, because even if you're a grown-ass man with a mustache and everything, you may shed some tears, you may have some runny mucus running down your nostrils, but it's okay. It's okay to cry about real stuff like collectibles that we didn't get. And you guys might be wondering why it is that you would cry. Well, today we're going to be talking about the potential Star Wars Black Series Haslab projects that we could potentially see in 2025. This is mostly speculation, but there are some pretty hefty rumors floating around the community that some of these we could potentially see in 2025. And I know most of you guys are wondering why it is that I'm assuming it will be a Black Series Haslab rather than a Star Wars Vintage or a Marvel Legends one. Well, I just feel like most of those have been relatively successful and we've been getting them pretty consistently over the past few years. The last two Black Series Haslab projects that we got, if I'm not mistaken, was the Riva as well as the Rancor Haslab project, and both of those just failed miserably. So I think it's only a matter of time before we finally get a proper Star Wars Haslab project from the Hasbro team. So let's get straight into today's video. As I said, let me know your thoughts down below. Which projects would you like to see come to fruition, or which ones do you think are going to happen that I missed on today's video? And yes, I decided to start off with the one that just makes us shed tears, the one that just reopens old wounds. We're talking about the Rancor Black Series action figure. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail because I've made like 3 different videos where I talked about Hasbro just potentially giving us this in the foreseeable future and how much we desperately wanted that Black Series Rancor action figure. So I'm not going to do it. There were some interesting decisions made here, some tier levels that really didn't make sense, and a lot of the stuff that was included with the figure, like the cardboard backdrop, the drool, and the bones, were just kind of an insult to a lot of us. The figure was supposed to be going for $349.99, so $350, which I think was a little bit high. And we could potentially see this released as a regular figure, you know, in a pre-order, with a pre-order window similar to Dragon Man, maybe just a stripped down version, no cardboard backdrop, no bones, no drool accessories, none of that. You just got the Rancor figure for a little bit under the $350 price point. I'm not sure if they would be able to do it, and I'm not sure if that many consumers or Black Series collectors would be interested in something like that. But I still have hope that eventually we'll get a figure like this. I know it's an absolute pipe dream because the first time around people just were not interested in it, but it just didn't make sense in terms of value. We were getting the Sentinel, we were getting Galactus. A lot of these figures seem to be a little bit more intricate than the Rancor, and yet that figure was going for $350. I just think a lot of the community just had a lot of questions and just overall just doubted the value when it came down to this figure, so it did not get fully funded. But who knows, maybe they decide to come back around, maybe they tweak some things, maybe get rid of some articulation, some extra tiers, some extra accessories, and then they're able to bring down the price enough to where people are interested, or they just add more stuff to it and keep it at that $350 price point. Maybe they include the Rancor Keeper or a Gamorrean Guard or something along those lines to really kind of spice up the value here. Heck, maybe they even add a harness for your Mandalorian action figure or your Boba, whoever you want to be riding the Rancor, and he's a perpetually relevant character because he was featured in the original trilogy, and now he is being featured in a lot of the new live action Disney Plus series. So it just makes sense to have this particular character in the display, but only time will tell whether we're able to get something like this. Like I said, I wouldn't hold my breath, but I would like to see this in like a stripped down version where people can just go in there and pre-order it, and then once it starts shipping out, people are charged. Like I said, similar to Dragon Man, but that project was, you know, much more affordable. It's a much smaller figure, so I don't know if that necessarily would work, but that is definitely still a possibility in terms of Haslab projects. Next up, I would like to see an AT-ST potentially. I know the AT-AT is completely impossible for a Black Series line. I mean, that would just be a gargantuan vehicle. It just wouldn't make sense. I don't even think anybody would be able to afford something like that. So the AT-ST just makes way more more sense. Again, another vehicle or another action figure or collectible that we could receive from the Black Series line that is relevant across the entirety of the franchise. Like, it was relevant in the original trilogy as well as the prequels, and then in modern day we're getting a lot of live action projects that feature ATSTs, so they're still relevant. We can still fit them into almost any display. What's interesting is they did do a Black Series ATST walker not too long ago, but it was under the Black Series line, but was for the 1/18th scale line, so it was technically for the Star Wars Vintage, unless I'm missing something, and maybe back then they really weren't pushing out the Star Wars Vintage line as much. But yeah, that one is more it scales better with the 1/18th scale, so I'm going to assume that a regular ATSD for the Black Series line would probably be somewhere between the lines of like 2 feet, but it's still capable of being manufactured. I wonder how much something like this would run. Maybe they include a pilot as a tier level. Maybe even one of the stretch goals could potentially be a blaster that shoots out projectiles, maybe some light up features, maybe some sound effects. I'm not sure if it's cool still to have action figures or collectibles that make sound effects, but I would love to see that for the ATSD. For the next potential project, we actually have a character or a collectible that is technically a vehicle, but also a creature. We're talking about the Bantha, also another one of these characters that was introduced in the original trilogy, the prequel trilogy, and then we've also seen them in some of those live action Disney Plus shows. If I'm not mistaken, the Tusken Raiders originally used them as a form of transportation, and then eventually we see it in The Mandalorian where Queel and Din Djarin also ride the beasts. This one's kind of interesting. I mean, I don't necessarily feel like they have to be too articulated. For the most part, just as long as they land the aesthetics. I would like to see some soft goods on this one, maybe as well. Maybe the fur is like a soft fabric or something. I'm not sure. Maybe the Bantha is flocked. I'm just throwing it out there. I know some people are like completely against any flock collectibles, but I just don't know if I want smooth plastic as the fur for the Bantha. Now, this particular collectible just makes sense on so many different levels. It makes sense as a consumer because this is a character or an action figure collectible that we've been waiting now for quite some time, but also on the side of Hasbro because there will be those people out there that want to army build or at least have 2 to 3 of these in their display, and it makes way more sense because there are some diehards out there that will definitely reach pretty deep into their savings just for these collectibles. And also, compared to the 2 former entries into today's list, the Bantha is a little bit smaller, so I do feel like it would be way more affordable, which is one of the main reasons why I would lean more towards like that pre-order window that they had for Dragon Man. This is the kind of collectible that I would see there. This kind of appears to me like it would be in that $100 range just because, as I said, it wouldn't be too articulated and it's not like a big giant massive beast or a big giant massive vehicle, but still, this is yet another collectible that I would love to see for the Black Series line. I would also love to see an updated Dewback action figure, and I know we technically already got one for the Black Series line way back in the day. It was a deluxe collectible with, I believe, a Sand Stormtrooper. I don't quite recall exactly how much these were going for retail, but I know right now if you go on Amazon you should be able to find it for like $80 to $90, but you can definitely tell the sculpt was completely outdated and it would be nice to see something upgraded, something with way more articulation, better paint applications, maybe an articulated tail with soft plastic and then a thick wire running through it. The saddle on the original Black Series Dewback was also completely outdated. It was very small and didn't really fit the source material, so maybe they could expand that a little bit more and make it look a little bit more accurate to the original source material. And you guys may notice a little bit of a trend for the next 2 entries on today's list, and that is that a lot of these have already been released in the past under the Star Wars Black Series line, but a lot of these are massively outdated. The articulation just isn't there. They have ugly pins. I mean, we don't want to see those anymore. And we have 2 perfect examples with the Wampa and the Tauntaun. Both were released for the Black Series line at one point, but as I said, they're completely outdated. And I would just love to see, as I said, for the bantha, maybe they could flog the entirety of the figure just to add that like realism, or add like a really matte color tone to both of the figures, just because I feel like seeing that glossy glimmer from the plastic just takes away a lot of the realism. Not to mention, if these are potentially Haslab projects, you want to see them go all out. You want to see those, minor little details that you wouldn't see from a regular mainline release. And then potentially maybe we can get like updated Hoth versions of Luke and Han. And maybe even for the Wampa, they could include a little cave diorama set. Doesn't have to be too big, but just something cool where you could hang Luke upside down, maybe. Maybe add some extra bloody accessory pieces. That might be a little bit too far. Think of the children, but seriously, I would love to see updated versions of both of these. I think if you try to go out there and find them out in the wild, I haven't really kept track of these in the third party, but I think they're probably going for like well over $100, in some cases closer to like the mid 100s. So even if they decided to upgrade these and give us some extra accessories here and there, they would probably be the same price as the older Black Series figures. So it just makes perfect sense, I think, all around. And both of these, well, the Wampa not so much, but the Tauntaun is another perfect example of another potential army builder. You could have multiple different characters riding the Tauntaun, and that's exactly what Hasbro wants, right? If there's a potential to army build, there's a potential for collectors to buy multiples of these. I think that's just right up their alley. That's exactly what they would want as a business. Now, circling back to the vehicles, we could also potentially see an X-Wing for the Star Wars Black Series line, as well as a Snow Speeder. We have already seen the Snow Speeder, but as I already mentioned, it could desperately need an upgrade, even though it's, from what I remember, it's not that old of a vehicle. But as I said, this particular iteration could have all the bells and whistles, some light up features, maybe some sound effects, even potentially add more detail to like the cockpit area, for example. Now, as far as the X-Wing, I don't think we've ever received a Black Series version. We have received X-Wings in like Lego form. We even received a version for the Star Wars Vintage line. Now, this would definitely be a gargantuan vehicle, and it would have a pretty hefty price point, but as I said, I think we're craving Star Wars Black Series merchandise from the Haslab team, and I just think we're starving for something that we've never received in the Black Series line. Not to mention, we have a ton of different pilots that have been featured that could perfectly fit into this X-Wing. The most notable one being Luke Skywalker in his pilot attire, but now is a perfect time to upgrade that figure. We've received it now like 3 different times. We received it originally, and then I believe in the archives wave, and then in a retro carded wave, but they were essentially the same figure being re-released over and over. And so now would be, as I said, they would go hand in hand to receive a brand new Luke pilot. For the last two, I had to do a bit of digging just because they don't have like official titles, or it depends on the source material, I guess. We've seen a lot of different collectibles, especially like Lego sets, that have different terminology compared to like the Star Wars vintage sets. I'm not sure exactly why that is, but for example, the Battle Droid Transport Vehicle is a perfect example of that. Like, we've seen it titled a number of different ways depending on what the collectible is, but this is another perfect opportunity here, especially considering the Battle Droid as a collectible just hasn't sold extremely well. There are times where when they've had to go back and do like a repaint on the Battle Droid and try reselling it that way. But I think for the most part, they're readily available. I think I've seen them on clearance or on sale at least a handful of times in the past, and that really shouldn't happen. I mean, this is an army builder. People should want to have like 5 or 6 of these, or at least bare minimum a couple in their display to be able to recreate certain sequences, and we haven't really seen that. So having a transport vehicle, not only are you giving the collector community something that they desperately want, or something that they could add, or that adds value to their display, but also you would kind of force their hand to at least buy a few more battle droids. Or better yet, you could even have some exclusives that go together with this particular vehicle, although as I said, probably would be better for Hasbro to just try to push their old battle droid action figure, especially considering that body mold has just been completely panned by collectors left and right. It's definitely not one of the more coveted figures out there. And then lastly, the final potential project that we could see from the Hasbro Haslab team has to be the homing spider droid. Now, I don't quite recall if this has ever been used in like the original trilogy. This seems like one of those like battle vehicles that was only used during the prequel trilogy, probably during episode 1 or mostly during Clone Wars, but maybe it was featured during episode 1 and 3 as well. And let's not forget, after Revenge of the Sith, towards the end of that particular film, they decide to shut down production on battle droids in general. And that's supposed to be one of the main reasons why we never see any battle droids during the original trilogy. And so I guess this particular Haslab project would probably only fit into certain displays or any display that features prequel trilogy characters. So I suppose this particular project would just have way too many limitations, or could potentially run into some roadblocks from certain collectors that only collect maybe like original trilogy stuff, or there are some newer collectors that really don't have any interest in any older characters or action figures. Maybe they've only been collecting like the Rey trilogy sequels or modern day Disney Plus live action collectibles or action figure waves. So I suppose it could be a roadblock for this particular collectible, but I just thought I would throw it into the list. This is definitely one of those collectibles that I think would fit in just perfectly with people that are all about the Clone Wars, and I'll definitely include myself in that particular group of collectors. But as I always say, this is just my personal list, my personal take, my personal perspective on the entire situation. There may be, as I said, some collectibles that I might have missed out on, or some potential projects for the Haslab team that I might have not even thought about. Let me know down below in the comment section, which of these would you like to see go into production? Very curious to see what the community has to say. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, for listening to me ramble on about random action figure nonsense. If you guys enjoyed this type of content, make sure to stay tuned. We do this pretty consistently. And as always, make sure to stay safe out there and enjoy the hobby. That's the most important part of all this. Pose your action figures, photograph them, just enjoy them. I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you.